Good afternoon. My name is Pete Kofod. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Certainty Blockchain. Where's the?
Oh, get right here.
Oh, sorry. Okay, that's fine. I'll just talk right here. Okay, better. I am the Chief Technology Officer for Certainty Blockchain, and we have a platform that's called Avail that is being used for a variety of human resource applications and blockchain-driven applications. And I'll be glad to talk to you about that afterwards if there's any interest in it. But what I'm going to talk about is the process of choosing whether to go with a public or private chain. This is going to be relatively rudimentary, but for those of you who may have only operated in the sort of the financial space and are somewhat new to the idea of building a blockchain-powered application, I just want to give you guys some things to think about as you go about. So if you're well on your way in the application development, you can probably go out and grab some chocolate or something like that. But I just want to give you sort of some things that we've identified in this process. And I spoke here in 2014, and at that time, I actually, the talk that I did was, because at that talk pretty much everything was, or that conference at Cryptolina, in 2014, everything was about sort of the financial aspect, the different kinds of coins, Bitcoin, and I think I even had something that was called Shark Coin, and that's when you knew that it had jumped a shark and stuff like that. And so my presentation at that time was as an entrepreneur that was reaching out to other entrepreneurs that were looking for opportunities, and the things I was talking about was, what can the blockchain be used for that is not related to financials? And so at that time, I think Vitalik spoke at that conference as well. And the things that I focused on at that time, and I should have thrown the slide up, because it looks like some of these things have happened. One was identity management. Look at it today. I mean, it's amazing what's happening with identity management on the blockchain. It's an absolute, it's a no-brainer. The other one I threw out there, which I'm surprised that we haven't seen happen yet, is how to secure BGP. So for those of you who are in the networking side, understand the significance of being able to secure the internet routing protocol and how the blockchain can be used for that. So if there's anybody that really wants to do that right now, that opportunity, I believe, is still out there. And then the last one was trusted logging. And we ended up doing some trusted logging for the rail industry and using blockchain. It's still being used in sort of an incubator mode. They're not using it in production, but they're very, very seriously looking at the blockchain to be able to track incidents. And so, in particular, making sure that logs are tamper-proof and that everybody can see what happened, because these tend to be pretty big. Anyway, with that in mind, that's sort of a little bit of an aside before I get started. I want to go ahead and kick in to the subject of my talk. And what I'm going to talk about is the 5 things that you should consider when deciding which platform to go on. And the first decision that you have to make is, are you going to go with a public, a public blockchain infrastructure, private, or in some instances, obviously hybrid, where you do some kind of an integration. And those are the 5 things that we believe that you should consider. And the first one being, community, consensus, culture, compliance, and cost. So, really quickly, what is the difference between the public and the private chain? So, really, the defining difference between a public and a private chain is that is defining who's allowed to participate in the consensus of identifying consensus of a transaction, right? So in a public chain, anybody can participate. That's the whole idea behind it, and that's sort of what's the original, right? So that's the Bitcoin blockchain stuff, of course, an example of that, and all the other public chains out there. You can do that, create your wallet, and off you go. The private chain, so our friends from Hyperledger are here. It's a little different. Now you're talking about sort of there's a permissioning process in which the participants have to come in. And so those are really the big differences. The technologies and stuff like that are, tend to be very, very similar, though there's going to be some differences. We'll talk about that. But by and large, really what it boils down to is who gets to play. And so think about that when you're developing your application, right? So the first question you're asking is this something that everybody needs to, you need everybody to be able to access without you controlling that? Or is this access onto the actual chain and being able to participate in the consensus, the development and reaching of consensus, is that something that you need to, control? So the first one is exactly that. Is the community closed? Is the community of participants in your application closed? In other words, do they need to come to you in order to participate? And so that, of course, extends is that, can community members be anonymous, or is identity management sort of going to be a factor? And then also, sort of the community, the next question you want to ask is, how large is the community going to grow? Is this something that you expect to go global, or is this something that you think is really sort of contained within a certain industry, right? So that railroad application that I mentioned earlier, that was a private chain. I can almost assure you that that chain will remain private for a variety of reasons that we'll get into afterwards. But that's an example of a private chain. So the next one is consensus, right? So let's define consensus really quickly. It's the network protocol that's used by the participants to agree on a set of whether a set of transactions are valid or not valid, right? So it's basically the process of the audit. It's the audit process. So I've thrown up the 4 protocols up there. I think there are some more out there, but those are the 4 big ones that I know of, right? So proof of work and proof of stake, most people are familiar with those, certainly on the public side. And then there's a delegated proof of stake, and then there's one that does exist on public chains, but it's very, very popular in the private chain. That's the practical Byzantine fault tolerance, and it's as hard as the name sounds. And so those are the if you understand how those consensus protocols work, that will also drive you to understanding what your platform is going to be. Because some of these, if you have a certain application, some of these will be wholly inappropriate for the type of application you're building. So it's important to understand what the underlying consensus protocol is for how you intend to build your application. And so one of the things, right, so in your protocol selection, well, a key one is that it drives the time to achieve consensus. So some of those will allow you to achieve consensus very, very quickly, and in some applications, it's critical that you have consensus very, very quickly. Others, just sort of by definition, are going to take time to reach consensus. There's intentional inefficiency or delay or work that has been placed in there. So at the end, so really, if the protocol is important, it may drive it may sort of like pigeonhole you into what platform you're going to go towards. So culture. This is sort of a simple slide. Some places are simply not going to be willing to put things on the public blockchain regardless of how that goes. So some of those things could be, I was going to slide into the compliance piece, but what we're talking about here is that they're just saying, you know what, I'm just not really comfortable with this type of information being on the public chain. I'm just not comfortable with this. And it's, the type of organizations, you've either worked in them, worked for them, dealt with them, and they have a real issue with it. They don't understand perhaps that this is something that can be handled very well. It's a cultural thing, and they say, we want to control the infrastructure. So if that's the case, that sort of is also going to drive where you go. The next one is compliance, right? Some industries are heavily regulated, right? So where there's a significant amount of GRC, that stands for governance, risk, and compliance, or risk management, or regulatory requirements that are going to drive your platform type, right? So do you have privacy issues, right? So HIPAA, are there things in which, those are examples, Sarbanes-Oxley, I'm just naming some things in the US, but these are, Europe has the exact same types of regulations and compliance requirements, and I'm sure the Far East does as well. So those will drive you towards what, those will restrict what kind of platforms or whether you can take something on the public chain, or whether something is going to be on the public chain. They may say, you know what, we really need this to be a trustless system. We want an anonymous auditing capability built in. And then finally, so for those of you who have dealt with governments, knowing that they also deal with sensitive and classified information, that will very likely not be allowed to go on the public blockchain. So, but as you probably know, blockchain technologies is a significant interest to the government, not just in law enforcement and the financial sector and the FBI, their Financial Crimes Task Force, who I've spoken with. They're very interested in it as to actually develop applications on it. And if you're interested, I can actually get you the information. They have a very, very, very active group in which there is a lot of participants that are writing stuff about blockchain-based applications for the public sector. That might be something that's of interest to some of you out there. So if you're interested, just hit me up afterwards about that. And then finally, cost, right? So there's two different ways to look at sort of the cost. One is, is there sort of a reward system for consensus, right? So mining, right? If that is something that you want to leverage and take advantage of, in which you can, basically, pay for the mining and sort of, pay for the, where you can sort of build that into the application, that makes the public chain obviously very, very attractive. But, you should also consider the administrative cost of a private chain. Let's go ahead and give an example. Imagine that there's some kind of an auditing application that has to, in which there's a GRC compliance, and it's required that there is 5 auditors. So what you could very well envision is that you have, the big 4 plus another company that are asked to basically set up nodes, consensus nodes, for this blockchain application, and they then run it. And then they basically get paid an annual fee for the maintenance of that. And so now you have your 4 or 5 auditors right there doing that. So that would be a way in which they're rewarded for running a private chain, but it's not built into the application, if that makes sense. And then also, it's just something in which you can recapture the costs of it in the transaction, right? Because remember what we talked about earlier, what we're really going to see a lot in the blockchain space over the next few years, is my prediction, is a lot of non-financial stuff, right? So, there's going to, we're already seeing it with identity management. We will see it driving, we're going to see blockchain applications driving IT back offices, and in which there's no real mechanism in which to capture cost per transaction, or there's no interest in it, rather. So that is so those are different things that you need to consider when you're looking at whether you should pick one of the public chains out there. And then after you've sort of selected that, and in many instances it may be a public and a private chain. So like the guys over at Bridge, that's what they're doing, right? So they have to interface with both the public chain and the private and their private chain. It's really, really cool work that they're doing. It's spectacular. So in fact, I will just a shout out to those guys. We were going to have to build something like that for ourselves. We're now looking at maybe using theirs, right? So that's pretty cool. So anyway, with that said, I think I'm done, and I am open to any questions.
Right on time. And are you available already?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Okay. Well, we'll take it. If there's any questions for Peter, please catch him after the show. And thank you very much.